Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Women of the Military podcast. I'm really excited to have Doris here to talk about her story in the military. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, let's start with why did you decide to join the military?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. I've listened to a lot of your episodes, and I was a wandering suburban country tomboy, kind of lost, and really no one in my family was in the military. My dad had been, but before we were born. So I was just kind of hanging out with my best friend, and we met a recruiter at a bar playing pool. And the next thing we know, we are taking the ASVAB test um, and signing up. But she chickened out, and I said, I think I could do it. I think I could do it. And off I was on my way. I didn't really never thought about it before. Didn't pay attention to the recruiters at the high school gym on career day. So it really was a whim that I ended up signing on the dotted line and raising my right hand and headed out.
That's kind of a cool story. So, your friend chickened out, but that didn't deter you. You were like, let's keep
Mm-hmm.
going.
Let's keep going. I was a bit of a fearless kid. I joined the carnival when I was 18. Me and my best friend, we take off, and we're working the carnival down the East Coast, and we get to North Carolina, and the guy that we're working for says, "Listen, we're going to go down to Miami, and I'm going to take a month off to go deep sea fishing. But after a month, I'll hire you too, and you can work on my booth on the strip." So all night long, me and my best friend are arguing. And I'm like, I'm taking my $70 and buying a bus ticket back to Vermont. And she's like, let's go, let's go. But I won. We get back to Vermont, and that's when we met the recruiter. And she doesn't want to go in the military. And I'm thinking, okay, she doesn't want to get paid, have a safe place to, earn a career, but she wanted to go to Miami and live on the strip and work for a guy in his fare booth. But I ended up going, and I chose to be a truck driver for my occupation because when I was on the road with the fare, I sat up high in the big box truck, and I kept begging the guy to let me drive because I thought I can drive this. I worked on a farm. Again, I was kind of a tomboy. I took auto mechanics in school, and they would never let me drive. So when I was talking to the recruiter, I was like, "Well, will the Army let me drive big trucks?" And he's like, "Absolutely." So I joined as a 64 Charlie back then, a transportation operator, truck driver, and yeah, that was the beginning of my very, very long career. I ended up spending 36 years in the military total.
Wow. And what year was it when you joined?
I joined December 1981, and I joined active duty. I had a 3-year tour, and I ended up going to basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And then when I transitioned to the truck driving school, it was right there on Fort Dix. So my brother would pick on me because my brother had joined the Air Force, and he went to San Antonio, Texas. And his first duty station happened to be in Korea. So here I was down in New Jersey, and then I got orders from my first duty station to be Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. So he was just kind of laughing, like, "Why did you join the Army? You get to travel more in the air, in the Air Force." And I was like, "Well, I wanted to be a truck driver." And he's like, "Well, the Air Force has trucks." But I just thought, well, truck driver, Army. Um, yeah. So I did my basic training as a truck driver, and then I went to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, for my tour of duty, and I spent 2 years, 10 months there. And then I just hated the Army. I wanted to get out. I couldn't. It just wasn't my jam. And I remember throwing away my uniforms, really just not appreciating the opportunities that were available to me. I was just this young, wild, um, young, wild teenager, whatever. I got out, and I had married a man that I met, and he was stationed in Germany, at Kitzingen, Germany. So as a 19-year-old or 20 years old, I guess it was, I had gotten married and flew over to Germany to be with him. And he was an infantry guy. And so I spent a year over in Germany as a spouse of an active duty man. And yeah, I guess I'm kind of rambling on, but that's the beginning of my life with 36 years in the military.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I love hearing it. And so you went to Germany for a year as a spouse, not in the army, but
Right.
obviously that 2 years doesn't equal 36. So what happened after
Yes.
that?
How did I add on to it? Well, when my husband and I, we were a young married couple, and I talk about all of this. I wrote a book, and it was a memoir. It's my whole story. So if you want the whole story, check out the book. But I did come back to the States with my husband. We got divorced, and he had transitioned to the National Guard. I never heard about the National Guard option from the recruiters, and that you could be in uniform and serve right in your state. And I missed home when I was in Germany. And so when I came home and my husband and we had divorced, he joined the National Guard. I said, I'm going to join the National Guard. And so I called up the recruiter. They weren't very impressed with my being a truck driver, a previous truck driver. They talked me into going into the personnel company. And so it was an all-female company. The only men in the company were the men that were running the company. This was back in 1986. And yeah, so I just was like, okay, well, sure, at least I'll be in the Guard, and I joined the unit. Back then we had typewriters, these big cases, typewriters, and we would go to the units and help the soldiers fill out their insurance forms and their health insurance forms. And I became an expert typist. And that was the beginning of my Guard career in 1986. A few months later, the women in my company said, you can work full time, because I was like jumping between jobs. Like I said, I was kind of a rolling stone. And I got a job, full-time job at the Camp Johnson. And I started out as a switchboard operator, typing all the phone calls, the phone call log. And that was January 1987. So I'm in the National Guard. I'm working full-time for the Guard, and I stayed at Camp Johnson from 1986 to 2019. Yeah, so that added to my 2 years, 10 months. And that's where most of my revelations and great experiences happened for me, was right. And my book is called Life at Camp, because I spent a life at Camp Johnson. And so, yeah, it was definitely a lifetime, but my life's not over yet, but it was definitely a lifetime driving onto that base.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kinda crazy to hear, National Guard that isn't I mean, it is uncommon, but it's not, like, totally uncommon that you would stay at a base the same place
Yeah,
the whole time. Because I mean, that's one of the advantages of being in the National Guard is you have that stability of where you live, and
yeah,
you wanted to be close to family, and so then you don't have to move around, and so that is that's but it's just kind of so different than, like, active duty where you're moving here
yeah,
and there and trying to
yeah.
figure
I
it
mean,
all out.
sometimes every year, sometimes 18 months, sometimes, a longer tour. But, and the fact that my career, I joined as a personnelist, and I ended up in the headquarters company. And when you're working full time for the Guard, your weekend position is tied to what you do full time. So I think that, and I've listened to many of your episodes, like there's not a lot of conversations around the Guard, the National Guard, but here in Vermont, we have a very small base, Camp Johnson. Our Guard is a small size Guard. But there is a third of the Guard works full time to ensure that the weekend warriors can hit the ground running when they show up for drill. And so they're, preparing everything and the training plan and all the equipment that's needed. And of course, the payroll and administrative processes just to secure property and logistics and all that. So there's a lot going on between drills. And that's what the full-time National Guard is doing. And other states have more than one base, but in Vermont, we have our headquarters in Colchester, and then we have 33 different armories around the state working. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's like this misnomer that people for the Guard, they just show up 1 weekend a month and they don't realize like how many people it takes to do the
Yeah.
work behind the scenes, especially like pay and, planning the training and
Yeah.
there's so much that goes into it that I think sometimes we forget about. Especially like active duty people think, "Oh, the Guard, they work part-time," and they don't realize that
Yeah.
there's an active component. So,
Yes, and it takes a lot, and especially when you have a fighter wing. The Air Guard has a fighter wing component, so there is a lot going on between drills, a lot of flying, and a lot of missions that are going on. Um, but yeah, so I started working full time, and I when I became a E6, it was 2001. I had two toddlers, and I could also in the Guard, you have to have a slot to make your next rank. So there has to be a available position. And there was very, very few positions uh, for the administrative. It was a 75 Foxtrot at the time, administrative MOS that I had as enlisted to make E7. So I chose to become a warrant officer, and I had enough credits and experience to qualify to become a administrative warrant officer. So I was 38, and I had two toddlers at home, and I said, I think I'm going to shift gears. I had a dream of being a sergeant major. I thought that would be an awesome rank. I'm very much a people person, an outgoing person. I'm not afraid to lead people. So it was a little bit of a tough shift to go to warrant officer candidate school, and then you start at the bottom as a W01, and you can go through the career progressions up to a CW5. And so again, I was 30, 38, I think I had 36, 38, something like that. And I went to warrant officer candidate school. So then I started on that professional road militarily. Um, yeah, just
yeah.
shifting gears.
So, at the time when you switched from, enlisted to being a warrant officer, what was the training like that you had to go to? You said you had 2 young kids that you had to leave behind. So what was that like?
Yeah, and also I'd like to mention that my husband is also a soldier. We're both the same age. We both joined when we were 18. We both retired at the same age at 56. But yeah, and so he also did 2 combat tours. I never did a combat tour. So when I left in 2001, it was before 9/11, and my kids, I'm like 6 and 4, 4 and 6. I don't know. My son was born in 98, so I'm trying to do the math now. But they were young. And the thing that I knew I could do it, there's a lot of enlisted people who went to warrant officer school, and they were like, oh, it's really tough, and they really dog you. Um, but it's only for 30 days for reserve people. So I was like, I can do anything for 30 days. And so while I was there, it was in Alabama, February 2001. It was hot. It was still hot in February. And when they were yelling at us, the Army needs more NCOs, you want to, you ain't going to make it. I just was like, they're just trying to get me to quit. I'm not going to quit. So my coin that I had made with my motto was never quit. And there was a few days in there, because when you get there, there's no cigarettes, there's no sugar, there's no soda, there's no coffee. It's very intense, you know, especially the first couple of weeks. It's just like they just want to pressure you as much as possible. And I just knew that, and everybody was yelling. I was like, why is everybody yelling? Because that's what people do when they're stressed. Like your comrades were yelling at each other. And I was like, why? Because everybody stunk, because they only give you 5 minutes to clean up before you have to get down and show up at formation. And so for people who had been in the Guard and you show up to drill, sometimes you can show up late and your uniform might not be perfect. It's a real shift from the drill status or working full time for the Guard. And you just got to go back into, when I joined basic training at 18, it was like, okay, just tell me what to do. I'll do it, and you come to the position of attention, and you don't have in your head this is bullshit. You're like, okay. But when you're 30 something years old and you're a parent, and there was a lot of men who were very professional, made a lot of money, and they're put into this very humbling situation for a reason. And that's what I got out of warrant officer candidate school, was all of the pressure is to test your ability to operate under pressure and pay attention to every detail. And so I really appreciated that. And I think that it did make me definitely more at ease under pressure. Yeah.
So overall, you felt like the training was really good. Like it was humbling, and sometimes it was a little annoying, but
Yeah.
overall, it helped you to become a better leader and prepared you to be a warrant officer.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes I used to think, you know, I used to have a very bad attitude because I don't have a college degree, that a college degree is just a piece of paper. But I've taken a lot of college courses and I realize it's not a piece of paper. It is a symbol of all the work and research and reading and testing your brain and all of that. And the same thing with officer training or any kind of specialty school that a person takes in the military. It's not just the badge or the 1059. It's really the experience, that's just one layer upon another layer upon another layer that builds your competency, your confidence, and your fearlessness to like, if I can do that, I can do anything. And so definitely warrant officers in the military going through that training, when they come back, whatever their specialty is, they have a more intense attention to detail sort of focus. And so I feel like that's what I came back from warrant officer candidate school, and it was wearing my warrant officer rank. That was the difference between the E6 who left and the W01 that came back.
Yeah. Yeah, so you weren't the same person. You even, and like you said, like you're starting over because you're at the bottom of the, rank
Yeah,
structure, but you're a different person and a different perspective, and you can provide a different way to look at things. And so
right.
I really like that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when I came back as a warrant officer, again, I'm working full time for the National Guard, and I was in the human resource office. And so much of my career, they kept me at Joint Force Headquarters, which is really kind of rare when you're in the National Guard. A lot of people go from one unit to another depending on their assignment and their rank, things like that, especially officers. They do several different units. But I was in the Joint Force Headquarters as a warrant officer in the Human Resource Office, and I just stayed there. The only time that I was transitioned out was in 2009. The Vermont National Guard was getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan, and our brigade, our 86th Brigade, was going to be going. So they were taking people from the headquarters to fill in positions in the brigade, and they brought me over there. But my husband was a first sergeant in the brigade, and he was in charge of a transportation unit. And so I spent 3 months in the brigade doing all kinds of training. I was not a very good shooter, or whatever you call it, marksman. I was horrible, and I had failed when I went to the qualifying range. And the brigade commander called me the following Monday when I came to work, and he said, "Chief, we've decided we're going to take your husband to Afghanistan, and we're going to send you back to the headquarters unit." And I was like, "Is this because of my rifle non-skills?" And he was like, "Oh, no, it has nothing to do with that, because the brigade commander had 14 married couples that he had to decide which one, what's better for the Army, what's better for the mission." And so I did not deploy. I would have deployed to Afghanistan as an equal opportunity. By that time, I was working in the equal opportunity office of the National Guard. And so that's what I would have deployed as this equal opportunity advisor. So I never had a chance to deploy, but my husband went to Afghanistan and did an outstanding job as a first sergeant of his transportation company. So that was my last chance.
Yeah. So the Vermont National Guard was in Afghanistan when I was there too. And
Oh,
I I worked actually with the finance department because I don't really know why, but they were in charge of helping fund the PRT projects. I don't know if that's just like how it shook out and where they
okay.
stuck them, but one of my really good friends was in the Vermont National Guard.
Well,
So
isn't
I'll
that
I'll tell you
connection?
after we're done recording. We can talk about that.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, yeah, because I deployed in 2010, and so they're, like, gearing up to deploy, and
Yep.
it's kind of a small world, but yeah,
Yeah.
they
We're
were
all connected.
they were really critical to the work that we did, at least the finance office that I worked with. We had a really
Hmm.
good relationship with them, and I'm still friends with him today, so, I just got to
Okay.
see him in February, so it's kind of a
Yeah.
small world, but, uh yeah, and so so it's kind of funny hearing you talk about the Verm I was like, "Oh, I know about the Vermont National Guard because
Yeah.
my"
Yeah.
so, but
Yeah.
yeah, and that was like a big deployment because they were stationed the people I worked were at Bagram,
Yep.
and,
That's
you
where my
know,
husband was.
there
Yep.
was a lot of stuff going on
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
they yeah,
Yeah,
so
and I'm back here as a spouse of a combat soldier. Back well in 2010, my daughter was 12 and my son was 10, and decided that he wanted to play football. And my daughter was deciding that she didn't like me anymore, and everything I said just irritated her. So that was a tough year for my husband to be gone. And I did not realize, we made it through it because he had deployed in 2005 to Kuwait. And so we knew, the kids and I knew that we could go a year without dad. Um, and we wrote letters, and especially in Afghanistan, we could do Zoom calls or whatever they had, and much more communication. So we knew we could do it, but I did not realize that the age of my children and 2005 didn't seem to affect them as much as the 2010. And it was just what was going on in their lives. So the transition when Phil came back, that was a rough couple of years to get us in sync again, and operating as a foursome. So it's definitely challenging, the transition back when soldiers have spent a whole year away from their family.
yeah.
Yeah, so but we made it. Got we got back together. We're still together, and children are successful. So it can be done for sure.
Yeah, I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, well, you move a lot in the military, so this is easy." And it's like, "No, my life is not the same." And same thing with like deployments. Like, "Well, you've done a deployment before." It's like, "Yes, but either
Yeah.
I'm in a new place or my kids are at a
Mhm.
different life stage." Like it's
Yeah.
never like there are things you learn that you can use on the next move or the next deployment or whatever comes up, but it
Yeah.
doesn't change the fact that like we're humans and life is different and different
Yeah.
emotions and I mean, I really could imagine, like, how much harder it is to have a 10 and 12-year-old and not have dad there than, like, when they're little. It's still
Yeah.
hard, but they aren't quite as aware
Right. And they're
and,
so dependent really on, they were dependent on mom, and grandma was here, and aunts and uncles and stuff. So they were just kind of playing and not really realizing, they definitely missed dad. They wrote him letters, but it was the age does make a difference of what's going on in their life. So, but the brigade was the one time I was out of Joint Force Headquarters. And then I just want to say that in 2014, I spent a year in the recruiting battalion. So, of all the years that I spent at headquarters, those were the two times that I was out. And being in the recruiting battalion for the Vermont Army National Guard really gave me another eye-opening perspective, because by then I'm in my late 30s, right? And or almost 50. And I've been in the headquarters unit, so I haven't done a lot of field duty. And the structure in the headquarters unit is very different from line units. But when you go into recruiting, you are exposed to all the young 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds that the recruiters are bringing in, and their eyes are wide open and they're just full of hope and anxiousness. And so I was in the RSP program where we had the new recruits do drills to learn drill and ceremony, to understand what was going to be happening at basic training and AIT. And it was a very great experience. I spent a year there as a warrant officer. And I just really appreciated what recruiters do out there talking in the communities about the experience of joining the military and the National Guards, especially the National Guard, because it's right here in our community, but a lot of people don't even know it.
It's so
Yeah.
true. Yeah. The place where I grew up in, like, right near the airport, and I didn't know it was there until after 9/11, and then, like, the F-16s are flying overhead all the time, and, like, they were probably there before September 11th, I just never noticed them, and then after that, it was like, "Oh, look, there's jets flying overhead all the time,"
Yeah.
and so it's kind of funny how something was there the whole time, didn't even
Mhm.
notice it, and then, September 11th happened, and it was like, "Oh, look, yeah,
Oh, yeah. There's a military base right near me.
yeah,
Yes.
that
So,
yeah,
well, my career again, every day, both my husband and I worked at Camp Johnson. So it was our life there. And the last 13 years, I worked in the Human Resource Office full time, and we wore a uniform. We were accepted service. So there's AGR status, and then there's technicians, accepted technicians. So yeah, so my husband worked in the mechanic shop, the CSMS shop. So it was our life there at Camp Johnson. And the last 13 years of my career, I was the equal opportunity and diversity officer for the Vermont National Guard. And when I got the job, I just want to say, like, you're in personnel and you're doing personnel, but I was doing the computer system for 7 years. I said, that's not for me. And then I transitioned to training, and I was helping full-time employees get new equipment training. So I'm sending them on planes and helping them do the paperwork to get the training. And my boss at the time sent me to New York City to take a Myers-Briggs personality indicator certification course. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that to me was almost life-changing learning about personalities. And it really triggered for me this need or want to be involved in just helping people understand how they operate and their personalities. And I learned my husband was an introvert and I was an extrovert. And, you know, we are complete opposites of our personalities. And I think it saved our marriage because I just understood that we operate differently, but we love each other. So in the training field, I was trying to train full-time soldiers and Air Guard personnel, soft skill training, how to be a coach, how to be a mentor. But military people are very transactional in their leadership trainings. So they did not like me. They did not like my soft skills training. And it was almost like, this was Monday through Friday, not the drill weekends, but Monday through Friday, I was trying to put on these trainings. And it's really hard because when you're a warrior, when you're a soldier, you know, on the drill weekends, you're just giving orders and you're getting the job done. But Monday through Friday, you're working with employees who have labor rights. And you can't just tell them to do it. I mean, you tell them as a supervisor, but there's a very different leadership style that you have to use when you're working with technicians. So I got very invested in that type of work, and the equal opportunity and diversity position was available. And my boss said, I think this would be a good fit for you. And I moved into that realm. And again, spent the last 13 years working in that. And yeah, it's changed my life. It's changed to how I looked at things. I just definitely had another perspective of the military organization itself and the mission. And yeah, so going to Myers-Briggs personality, MBTI, was a life-changing for me.
yeah. I think that's funny because when I first started the podcast, I would just be like, "Okay, let's do the interview," and, like, now I force myself to like talk to the guest and like because as two military people talking, it's really easy to just be like, get the interview done. Like we don't need to like talk beforehand. We don't need to like I wouldn't even ask people like, do you have any questions? I would be like, let's get started. And
Mhm.
then they would have
Yeah.
questions. So I've learned a lot over the years of like how I just did a interview for an article yesterday and I had okay like let's introduce each other and talk and not just focus on the fact that we need to like I need to ask you questions and you need to get me answers because we were both veterans and we could easily like bypass, you know, the I guess pleasantries of like what
Yeah.
normal humans do and military people are really easy at skipping over.
Like,
So
yeah.
it's
Getting down to
something that
business.
yeah, it's so
Yeah.
easy to be like, "I know who you are." We send emails back and forth, like, we don't actually have to be like, "Hi," and have
Yeah.
just a nice little
Mhm.
conversation to get to know each other. It was like I was like, "Okay, wait, we need to stop and, like, introduce each other and just have a little bit of camaraderie before I start diving into these
Yeah.
questions." So,
Yeah. And
it's
I
been
think I learned, especially I think military people, many of them make decisions based on logic and facts, and the details. And I am a feeler. So a lot of my decision making was based on how I feel about something. And so, and my husband and I are total opposites. We come home from work. I'm concerned about the dogs that have been inside all day, and he's checking the mail and seeing what business needs to take care of. So we definitely approach things very differently. And in a working environment, it just made me very aware of these supervisors that were very against the type of training that I was trying to get them to be more, to mediate conflicts and to ask inquisitive questions, to find out what motivates a person to do the job. And they were just frustrated because they had been raised in the military. You just do it when I tell you to do it because I outrank you. And so that really lended into my job as an equal opportunity officer. And I want to say the first client that I write about this in my book that came into my office, and she is describing a very, very tough environment she was in the mechanic's office. She was in the maintenance office. And now I had been a truck driver, and I worked in, definitely the maintenance office and was hung out there with the guys and drove trucks and stuff. So I thought I knew that culture. But what I realized in my 40s was that I acclimated to that culture when I was 18. And here was a woman who was, mature, been around a long time. She was E6, and she was not appreciative of the culture that she was being exposed to. And this was, 2004, 2005, and they were being disrespectful. So she wanted to file a sexual harassment case. And today I look back at that I had never thought about filing an EO case. I never thought about sexual harassment, yet I had experienced it throughout my 22 years in the military. And now I was in charge of a process to hold people accountable for behaviors that you think the military has these core values. We shouldn't we shouldn't have to have a program to hold people accountable to the behavior, but there are people who don't always, operate the right way that they're supposed to. So it was definitely eye-opening for me. And I spent 13 years doing that. And I realized that the military was very sexist. A lot of it's unintentional. A lot of it's unconscious. But because the military has a majority of men representing the command climate and command leadership positions, it's provided this atmosphere of masculine superiority. And I don't want to get too deep, but it's just I saw this bias that was happening every time I would present a conflict between a man and a woman, something that happened to them that she felt it was offensive and she wanted resolution. And I would go to leadership with it. And most of my energy was convincing them that it was offensive and that it was sexist and that it was, against policy. And I did not have very many satisfied clients. So it wasn't the funnest job, but I wrote a book about it. And my mom is in her 80s and she read the book and she said, Doris, it was very frustrating to read this 622-page book and hear about how tough your job was. And I said, well, that's why I wrote a book, Mom. It was a very tough job, but it put me on a mission to combat the sexism that often we tolerate because we don't know how to reject it in a way that will change the culture. So that's why I wrote the book.
I love that. Yeah. I think sometimes it's really easy to think about how it's easier to it's not easier, but it feels easier to just ignore whatever's happening instead of like taking that step of like saying, this is wrong, don't say that, or,
Yeah.
or filing a complaint and then, filing a complaint and then having where the leadership is like, well, that's not really offensive. It's like, no, it is. It is.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, it was very challenging and heart-wrenching to me. And I felt like I could not leave the military. I knew I could retire at age 56. I had more than enough National Guard years because you need 20 years to get a retirement at age 60. I had like 36 years, active duty and guard. And as a federal employee, I had the time and I could retire at 56. And so I get this federal retirement based on my full-time job. And at age 60, I got my military based on my rank. But I felt like I could not enjoy the benefits of retirement and play with my granddaughter, who's over my shoulder there, play with my granddaughter, Ray, my daughter's daughter, without documenting what I feel is the problem that can be solved through having more women in the military, and it's like, how do you get more women in a very male dominated, historically masculine type of business? And that's what I write about in my book, not just the problem, but the collection of heart-wrenching humiliations women face who really wanted to do a great job and they loved their job, but they felt oftentimes they felt like they weren't heard or valued or embraced for what they were bringing to the team, and instead acclimating to the male dominated culture to get ahead, to survive. And certainly I've listened to many of your podcasts, and there are so many fabulous, outstanding women who have been very, very successful in the military and had great careers. So it seems daunting to shine the light on sexism and the prevalence in the military. But, all of the reports, all of the research, validate the fact that 1 in 4 women will get sexually assaulted in the military. But I still encourage women to join the military because we need more of you. And my advice to them is hold them accountable for the values that are instilled when we go to basic training of honesty and integrity and selfless service and courage, right? Just hold them accountable to that. And it's easy for me to say at 60, I'll be 61 tomorrow. It's easy for me to say, file a complaint, go to the EO officer, tell your supervisor. But when you're 18 and you're this young tomboy and you're embarking on your journey and something happens to you and you don't feel safe to tell anybody. So I just recommend that you find somebody to tell. Don't put it in your backpack. I talk a lot about that in my book, this imaginary backpack. Don't put it in your backpack and carry that weight. Like, unload it somewhere safe, and it's got to stay out of the backpack in order for us to reject the sexism that's happening and stop the continuum of harm. And so, as I said, the military gave us my husband and I and my children a great life here at Camp Johnson, the National Guard, and so many benefits. And I've heard you talk on your show before about the camaraderie and the networking and just getting each other. Like we get each other, you know. But the sexism is something that's my mission, is to combat the sexism many of us tolerate. And that's why I wrote the book. And yeah, I'm very proud of what I put in there and documented, and hoping that many people will check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely put a link in the show notes so that people can find it easily, and so that people can check it out. It sounds like an important book, and I think it is really important to talk about sexual harassment and assault, because it is something that is happening in the military, and there are women who are standing up against it, but they often face many challenges. And it's just so important that we talk about it, because you have to have 30% of the people within a culture to make change. And right now, we don't even have that many women serving. And so we need male allies, and we need more women to join, so that we can change the culture, because it's so important. So,
Yeah.
um, I want to also, to wrap up the interview, I always like to ask, what advice would you give to young women who are considering the military? So, what would you say?
Yeah, I definitely join the military with, and I heard this on the last episode, just kind of knowing what you value, what you want to do in life. Because I just kind of just made an offhanded, decision. Hey, let's join the military, be a truck driver. So do a little research, ask the recruiters things, especially talk to National Guard members in your community about different occupations and options that you have, and then just be you. Be you is my big thing. Be who you are. Bring your talents and your experience to the team, and hold them accountable for a fair and respectful working environment. Yeah, it'll be tough. You'll get yelled at, and you'll, yell back or whatever, but they owe you a respectful experience. So that's what I give for advice.
I think that's great advice. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for serving in the military. Thank you for writing your book and sharing the hard stories that you experienced. It's so important to talk about things, even when they're hard. So I really appreciate you doing that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been great talking to you.